good evening. My name is John Bulla. I am the interim director and CEO at the Heard Museum. On behalf of the Heard Museum, it is my honor to be introducing this evening's guest speaker, Dr. David Martinez from the Gila River Indian community. Dr. Martinez is an associate professor at Arizona State University, American Indian Studies program. He's the author of Dakota Philosopher, Charles Eastman, The American Indian Thought, and he's the editor of American Indian Intellectual Tradition, an anthology of writings from 1772 to 1972. He's also published articles in Wichazoshaw Review, Canadian Journal in Native Studies, the American Indian Quarterly, and the American Indian Culture and Research Journal. Dr. Martinez's areas of concentration are American Indian intellectual history, art and aesthetics, and folklore studies. He is currently in the initial stage of developing a book-length project on the works and legacy of Vine Deloria Jr. Please give him a warm welcome to Dr. David Martinez.
Good evening. I should also mention that I'm the director of the AIS Master's Program, and we're currently accepting applications until the end of July. So if you or someone you know is interested in a graduate program this fall, please send them my way. I appreciate it. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest tonight, Victor Masayesva, and I have a prepared introduction for him. A member of the Hopi tribe from Hopevilla, Victor Masayesva Jr. has been a lifelong advocate for the ascendancy of the indigenous aesthetic in multimedia productions. He has promoted this aesthetic by curating programs at the Museum of Modern Art in New York and serving as artist in residence at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, Banff Center for the Arts in Canada, and was a featured director and jurist at the Yamagata International Film Festival and the Clacpai Festival in La Paz, Bolivia. Honored with the American Film Institute's Maya Deren Award, Masayesva is an independent filmmaker who has been at the forefront of experimental filmmaking in the Native American media community. His publications include Husk of Time from the University of Arizona Press, and his media work is included in the permanent collections at the Center for Creative Photography, Tucson, Arizona, Museum of Modern Art, New York, Houston Museum of Art, Houston, Texas, and the Corcoran Gallery, Washington, D.C. So please join me in welcoming Victor Masayesva.
Thank you for coming here today. I've spent all day talking, so if you can't hear me, let me know. I'm going to go directly into what I brought with me. I have two programs. One is a program called Ritual Clowns, and I made that back in 1988, and I thought the content matter, first of all, it being a big part of our doings in the summer dances, people didn't understand what was happening. Even our own people didn't understand what was happening in the plaza, in the Kisonvi. And so part of my work, or why I dealt with it at that time, it had to do with how our community members were responding to what was happening in the plaza. And I thought the content matter was appropriate for, at the time, computer animation, and it was just beginning. So in that program, you're going to see some pretty clumsy, awkward animation, but that was at the beginning. At the time, there were two Cray computers in New York City that I had access to, and one was being used when they were where they were producing Saturday Night Live, and they were using it essentially to animate titles. So that was a time in the period when I tried computer animation. So it looks pretty goofy now, but that was the period of, and they had invited artists in to come and see how they could tweak the computers. And so that was in 1988. And so it's been a long cycle. So I'm going back now with our current project to another computer-intensive animation, and I don't know where to go first on this. I'll just briefly mention we're having a meeting next week in Albuquerque area of indigenous timekeepers. And these are people from Mexico, South America, that are keeping time, watching time, and you know with the Mayan calendar how well documented that experience has been. So we had our first meeting gathering at Hotvela last year. And they wanted another one, so I thought if I encouraged that in the Pueblo country in New Mexico, they'd get involved. But with something like that, it tied into ritual and ceremony. We're not really getting people aren't busting through the door to participate. And some from Hopi really question why I'm dealing with it. I mean, that's not our clan responsibility. So it's a sensitive topic, time and calendar keeping. And I'll go back into that later. If we have time, I'll show some of the artwork we're working with to see if there's any students here, animators, that would be interested. And I'd like them to introduce themselves, and I can give you more details. So going back to ritual animations was my first attempt at computer animation, dealing with ritual clowning. We call them tzitzkut. And I worked with two people who, at that time, were from the clan who owns that, it's not really ceremony, who owns that knowledge. They were Percy Lomakwahu and Abbot Sikakwaptu, and they both since passed away. And I was encouraged by Abbot to do it because he thought at that time, back in the 80s, the clowning had become not serious and instructional as it's intended to be. That younger clowns were just going for the quick laugh, like the physical humor. Somebody falls down and hurts themselves and people laugh, and that kind of humor. And he says that the present day, or at that time, the clowns were disrespecting their wuyas, their ancients and their practices. So I worked with those two of them, and as far as I know, they didn't pass it on. So it was its own thing with that clan that brought it. So the elements are still there, but in terms of how they used to do it, get initiated into that doesn't happen anymore. So that was how that started, and I ended up making it. And then I got some criticism from younger Hopi people that I was putting out too much information. And in fact, I had pretty much edited it pretty heavily. So my thinking was, they know even less, and I had access to that information, but what could I really do with it? So I'm of a mind now to do what I had intended to do at that time. So we'll see where that goes. But so I pulled it out of distribution in 1992, and then about 2 years ago it popped up on YouTube, and somebody had posted it from Mexico. And it just turned out at that time that with the Maya cycle, they were like everybody was getting all excited about the end of the world, and so the clowning also fits into that. So at that time I screened it up in Canada for Indian people, and they were pretty encouraging about having more people see it. So since then I've only had one other screening, so this will be the third screening of that. So it's still out of distribution, and I'm hoping I can get back to it one of these days. So I think that's what we're going to start with first, ritual clowning. And as I explained, it's really basic animation for the time. So I'll run it off my laptop. Any other Hopis in the crowd? No ebi pa pangkot ya arrived ang no hin piang kiava hutuat hintas kana. So I was asking if there are other Hopi people here, and this is particular to Third Mesa. So I don't know if the similar ideas are in First and Second Mesa. But there was a lot of information, and I felt I had edited pretty heavily at the time, just to be respectful of that they were talking to me confidentially. They knew I was making a video, but I don't think they themselves had any idea of it. Well, they had no idea this is how it was going to end up. So I'm also editing in there. I'm also expressing my opinions with the imagery. So that was the context in which it was done, that they're disrespecting that clan's ceremony and just dealing with it superficially. And as I said earlier, they no longer initiate people into this as society. So I personally see that as well. It seems like they kind of go for the quick humor, and so I don't know where that's going to end up. I have no idea. So that's that. I'm going to now go to, unless anybody has a question, immediate question, and we can also deal with it later. I don't know how we're doing on time now. 7:47, okay. Yeah, I think we'll go into the other project I'm working on. Again, this is a condition at Hopi. There's a conflict over our solar and lunar calendars. You know, the sun being so significant, the assumption is that that's the main measure in the solar calendar. But at the same time, we pay a lot of attention to the months in which things happen or are supposed to happen. And that's quickly being forgotten when things are supposed to happen, and definitely the reasons for why they happen in those times. So, you know, I was personally involved in one in our village where our uncle makes those offerings at the winter solstice, and he was sticking to what he grew up with, and he got into conflict with the rest who were aware of Thanksgiving and Christmas. And that was their priority. And you know, the moon sometimes straddles the month, November, December. You know, it doesn't line up neatly with the Western calendar. But now we do things on weekends because it's convenient. And we're not doing things when we're supposed to, when those beings are present that are to help us. So essentially that information is known, but it's not practiced. And you see more people doing it than more people do it, and it just becomes a norm now. So we had this meeting in Hotvela on that, and we put together a short video with my uncle on that, and we showed it to the advisory team. And they again affirmed that that was also happening in their villages. So it was throughout the villages that this was happening. And they didn't know how to deal with it. And so they started talking about, well, maybe we need to talk more about why things happen or why we do things in certain months. But the feeling was generally, I think that we've gone too far. It's we can't go back, or people today are comfortable with their calendars. I mean, it's not broken, it works. So, so you know, it's, although we know it, and I don't think we're going to go back. That kind of was the dismal conclusion by the cultural advisory team. But I think it did got at least other people from other villages to talk about it. So the feedback we got was, yeah, that they were having their conflicts in their own village, and they were beginning to talk about it. And I think one year there was at least concerted effort to do things when they're supposed to. That one year. Then this year again we went out of sync. So 1 year they were attentive to it, and then 2 years later again we're back to doing things that are doing things at times that are convenient to us. So now we're dealing with the calendar and beginning to get bits and information, and we're realizing that we have a lot of ideas came from Mesoamerica, from the south. So we're beginning now to talk about what they've written and what we talk about. So we're making some of those connections now, and one example I can use is what a star we call Nangoy Sohu. Now, in the word itself, it contains that idea that it's one star, and that refers to Venus. Venus as the evening star, and Venus as the morning star. Most people think they're two different things, but they're the same star. It's Venus. And somehow Hopi people knew that, so they called them Nangoy Sohu. And the data is that it's a 280-day cycle of Venus. It shows up here. And after 280 days, then it begins appearing in the morning. So it's Venus. They're not two different stars. So in the words themselves, we're beginning to understand their understanding of astronomy. And so we're kind of backing it up with the what the Mesoamerican people had and how they've written it down. We didn't write our information down, but they did. So that's currently what I'm working on, and we're focusing on the Otomi calendar. You know, there's been a lot of research on that, and a lot of it is research developed by people who were comfortable with the Western calendar. So they made assumptions based on that. And in the process, I think they missed it, but that's the current scholarship today. And there's people have lived with it for so long that this introduction of the new idea by one of the Otomi elders we're working with is causing a lot of noise, and that goes to the Maya cycle, the cycle that had ended in 2012, and for most people, even people from the South, they thought the world was going to end on December 20th and restart on the 21st. But that doesn't follow with Hopi, with Hopi too, but practices of the things don't just happen like that. You know, one day, you know, the world ends, next day it starts up. And in the Otomi cosmovision, there's a transition before they are seated, so there's a rest period. And I think for those Hopis here, they know also, you know, when we finish things and there's a couple of days that it's still part of the whole thing, but nothing's really happening, but there's just that observational time 4 days after the main event. So that kind of is the Indian thinking that's now emerging. So when that period ended, the transition had to happen. And so the research is that the new cycle began on May 13th, 2013. And that was when Venus and the quarter moon showed up in the west. And that's documented in the writings, the Maya writings of when the world began in 3012 BC. But with this current research, it was that alignment of the moon and Venus, not the sun. So, you know, that's creating a lot of noise. And people have invested a lot of their reputations based on that. Part of the work that's being done is to reclaim time, Indian time. So my part of the project is to put that information out, because they said it's time to share this knowledge, because it's we don't understand the impacts it's having not knowing this. So my part of it is I guess the outreach, and so we thought an animation would be the best vehicle to get youth and their parents or caretakers involved in one place watching one production. And so we're focused on a planetarium experience. So it'll be projected onto a dome. So there aren't that many venues like that, but we think that kind of presentation of the months and time cycles, that's the appropriate way to see it, and how they would experience it. And I think you're all aware there's all this new technologies where you can put on these glasses and have a 3D experience, but we don't want that kind of individual personal experience. It has to be people seated together like this, watching together, and ideally the target audience is youth and their parents. So that's my part of the project, is the outreach part of it. So that's why I mentioned earlier, there's young or don't have to be young animators here. Please get in touch with me. And I guess we're getting close to finishing up. I'll show the work we did for the Cultural Resources Advisory Team, and a little bit of work we did with the Mesoamerican advisors. So we can, I guess, do the questions later. As I said, we're now working on this, and when we had the meeting in Hotvela, I went out to the people I thought would keep up with this information from the first Mesa, second Mesa, and apparently that it's no longer being done. I mean, people are not really watching or keeping the solar lunar counts. They do the equinox offerings, but that's about it. And it's not a daily thing occurring. But there were rooms and kivas where they were doing it. There was one older man who didn't want his kiva rebuilt because of that. He was watching that, and he had become accustomed to that space where he was doing that. We did end up rebuilding that kiva, but he said it could happen after he passed away. So essentially, they've put that practice away. And so if all that's happening, why bring it up? I mean, if we as Hopi people don't want to carry that on, who's to say we should? And it's just part of our thinking that everything has already been preordained. It's going to happen. We're going to lose our languages. The people who know this or do these practices, they're going to die and pass away. And all this is going to end. And so why bother? Why bother going back to this information? And it's my own opinion, and it's not that it counts a lot from the village I'm at from, that they say when they say, well, the old people, the people who have passed away, well, they'll take care of it if we don't do it right. But we have to take some responsibility. It's not a big deal to look to the west and watch it, see where the moon comes up. I mean, why are we not taking that responsibility? We're just kind of passing it off and say, well, our ancestors will deal with it when we can deal with it in that responsible way. So, and that ties into, that's the knowledge that we have, our entry level into our ties and connections to the natural world. Now we're in Kuyamaya, and that is when we're most aware of the winds. That's why it's called windbreak moon. It's actually another there's another name for it, but at home, the teachers of Hopi are kind of making a 12-month calendar. And whereas it was 6 for Hopi, the old calendar. So, that kind of thing's happening. And Kuyamaya was not really an established moon. I mean, it wasn't called that. But most people knew that moon was a time when we were really sensitive to the winds, so that's why they named it that. But it actually has a different name. It's Anak Maya. And I was asking around, what does that mean? And nobody really knows Anak Maya. But we call it Kuyamaya because that's how people understand it. And so that's our gateway into how we understand the natural world and why things happen in Pamaya when we expect the snow, because we're an agricultural-based people, so we're really sensitive to the natural world when things happen. So it's my idea that this information is important and that we need to know it because climate change is happening. And we are a part of it. And we are climate change. I mean, I think you're on your own deduce what that means, whether it's your practice of recycling plastics or whatever, or whether it's other more uncommon knowledge like what I'm saying about your entryways into the natural world. It's common Hopi knowledge that it's our behavior that's affecting these climate change or these kind of drastic swings. So that's what I mean. We are climate change. We're not distant from it. We're connected to it. We are the plants. We are the universe. To kind of exaggerate there, and not really exaggerate either. These months are our gateways into that knowledge and those connections. So if you're concerned about climate change, yes, you should watch the moon, what happens, what it's telling us. So that's the practical aspects of knowing, at least knowing this information, although, as I said, and the conclusion seems to be that we're too far gone and people are comfortable with this calendar, with Western calendar, so why fix something that's not broke?